So I presented a paper on crowdsourcing and the kinds of feedback that individuals receive in crowdsourcing. And the typical response is that organizations reach out to the public to get lots of ideas. And one thing that we know is that many individuals are left ignored. And we look at the role of rejections and how rejections can be used by organizations as a mean to get people to get more engaged and more effective in proposing ideas that are implemented by organizations. And then we also look at the kinds of side effects that it has on individuals. So under what conditions does it affect larger or smaller, and how does it affect the evaluation of others? So one of the interesting features about the data set is that we have information about the kinds of rejections that organizations do. So there's, to the simplest form, rejections that have no information content and rejections that have some kind of information content. And individuals that get an explanation for the rejection are more likely to engage again and become more effective than those who do not receive any information. Both have a positive effect on the likelihood of trying again and become successful, but if you get an explanation for the rejection, you're far more likely to engage again. I think there's several things that are very interesting about the digitalization, and I think one aspect that I think is very interesting is the amount of information that is being stored every day. And if you look at the amount of information that organizations collect, it's just astonishing. And obviously this begs questions about how to sift through the options that organizations have. How do you make decisions when you're overwhelmed by tons of information? And there are old quotes by Herbert Simon and the like that talks about how information consumes the attention of the recipients. And I think that is very true today, where organizations are just sometimes overwhelmed by the amount of information that they have. When you're overwhelmed by the amount of information, there could be all kinds of biases in how you make the selection decisions for where to focus your attention. It could be that you just listen to the same people that you listened to in the past. It could be that you just get very stereotypical when making these kinds of decisions. When we think about digitalization, we tend to focus on the very successful and the great companies that have made this. And I think there are quite a few losers of organizations that are not adopting different organizational practice to be efficient in getting information, storing information, and also making selection decisions among the information that they have. I think this is a huge challenge, and sometimes we just overly focus on the winners and not the long tail of potential organizations that are actually losing out. It's very easy to sort of collect all this information, but the kinds of organizational arrangements that you have to adopt are sometimes misaligned from the initiative to just collect information. So you obviously need to have decision committees that makes certain kinds of decisions about the kinds of information that you create. You may have to sort of incentivize people in a very different fashion that you did in the past. The big problem is that there's not so much research on the internal challenges of storing lots of digitalization. So lots of information about how you can store and create different kinds of information. But there is actually not very much research on the internal organizational aspects of digitalization. Just because it's a recent phenomenon, right? That all of a sudden, like, we store lots of information, but there's not so much information about how should you structure internally, how should you incentivize people, what kinds of managerial challenges exist for managers as a result of creating all this information. And perhaps the kinds of information that you need internally as a result of the digitalization, many of these things that we traditionally structure organization may be exactly the wrong kinds of organizational arrangements for a world that is much more sort of digitalized. I think there's not so much evidence on this, but I think this is something that has to be taken very seriously.